Hello, good morning to everyone. This is Dr.Kausar, Unnisa, Assistant Professor, Department of Commerce and Management, GFGC, Teacher. In the previous class and all, we have come across regarding to the uh, collection of data. Let us we go for the next concept. It is called as classification of data. See, after assembling the data uh, from the various sources, so it has to be segregated because whatever the assembling data, assemble of the data from the various sources, whether from the primary or the secondary sources, they are all in the form of ungrouped data. Whatever the data we have collected, which is in the form of raw form or in the form that is called as ungrouped data. Yes, the collected data or the raw data is also called as the ungrouped data, which is in the form of unorganized. So it should need to be in the form of organized and presented in the meaningful and easy form, which is going to facilitate further statistical analysis. Therefore, it is essential for an investigator to condense a mass data into more and more comprehensible form. The process of grouping into different classes or subclasses according to some characteristics, it is known as classification. And this tabulation is concerned with the systematic arrangement and the presentation of the classified data. Thus, the classification is the first step in the case of tabulation. And why we require this classification of data means, so it is condensing the mass data. So here, before going to study about the objectives, let us know what is this classification means. It is nothing but the process of arranging data into different classes or the groups according to their resemblance and similarities. So we know that the heterogeneous form of data, it has to be arranged in a proper form. The processed form of data what we have been collected, the raw data what we have been collected, it has to be segregated into their own characteristic features, or it has to be segregated according to their own classes, according to the own groups, or according to the same features or to the similarities what they are going to be have. So that process of arrangement of data is nothing but classification, or we can say that arranging the data into homogeneous groups. Homogeneous means which is having the same characteristic features, that is called as homogeneous groups. That is called as the classification. Let us know what do you mean. So some of the authors has been defined the classification, that is according to the Horace Secrist. He says that classification is nothing but the process of arranging the data into sequences. Sequences means it is according to the order, and groups according to their common characteristics. It is nothing but classification of the data according to in a form of an order or in the chronological order, or it may be in the form of ascending or descending order. Then we have to segregate into the groups. How the groups has to be formed is on the basis of their common characteristic features. That is called as the classification according to the Horace and Secrist. Let us then go why the classification is required. What are the objectives of the classification? We are going to come across few objectives of classification, that is to condense the mass data. We know that the huge voluminous data cannot be expressed into a small figures, so it has to be expressed in the form of the quantitative terms or in the form of a single figure or in the form of isolated form, where this classification makes us or it helps us to segregate the huge data according to the characteristics and also to express in the form of the numbers. So that is why we require the classification. And the second objective of this classification is that we want to see the homogeneity to heterogeneous features of the raw data. Whatever the data that we have been collected, which is in the form of heterogeneous, it has to be segregated according to the homogeneous features, which is having the same characteristic features. And with the help of this classification also, it helps us to facilitate comparison. We can able to compare the data from one variable to the another variable. If we are going to segregate into different groups, that becomes very easy for the classification. And also with the help of this classification, it makes us, or it gives the basis for the tabulation. If the groups has been classified or segregated, means that can be presented in the form of table, or it can be expressed in the form of graphs or pictures, so which makes very easily for the purpose of tabulation. So that is why we require the classification. And with the help of this classification, we can able to eliminate unnecessary data. Only the required form of data can be retained. The other form which is not required to the present data, it can be eliminated, and the data can be with the help of this classification, the data can be presented in a very simple form. So we require the classification. Let us will go to the different kinds or the basis of the classification of the data. Let us will go, there are four types of the classification. One is qualitative, second one is quantitative, next is geographical and chronological classification. What do you mean by this qualitative? Qualitative itself is going to be indicated regarding to the characteristic features or the attributes of the variables, which cannot be capable of measuring with the help of quantitative, which is not possible to measure in terms of numbers. So such kind of classification, that is called as qualitative classification. Again, for example, we can able to say that is honesty, beauty, employment, intelligence, or literacy. These cannot be measured, so it has to be expressed in the form of qualitative. So we are unable to express such kind of classification is called as qualitative. In the case of qualitative, we are going to come across three types of classification. One is simple classification, another one is composite, the third one is the arbitrary classification. What do you mean by this simple classification? Simple classification is nothing but classification of units on the basis of single characteristics is called a simple classification. For example, characteristics of any two attributes, any two categories where we can able to express. For example, the male and female, the honest and dishonest, or any classification where we can able to have like trained and untrained, experienced and inexperienced, only two attributes where we are going to be seeing. Such kind of classification is called a simple classification. The second type, that is called as composite classification. In this type of classification, the characteristics will be more than two. It is called as composite classification. For example, if you are going to have a category of male, means in the same category we can able to express, we can segregate in two, that is whether they are married or unmarried in the same thing. Female means female also we can have the two segregate classification, that is married or unmarried. This kind of classification is called as composite classification. And the third one, it is called as arbitrary classification. What is this arbitrary classification means? So some of the simultaneous classification of units on the basis of two or more, or the attributes which are not clearly defined. For example, the tall person and the short person. They are vary from the one investigator, how we are going to be classified from one investigator to the another investigator, how these people are going to be classified, or if the classifications are done more than two, only two characteristics features means it is simple character, or more than two means it is composite classification. Again, if it is more than two classification, or more than two or more characteristics means, so where we are finding very is not clearly defined the attribute, such kind of classification is called as arbitrary classification. And the second classification, that is called as quantitative classification. This type of classification is nothing but is the data are classified according to the quantities which is capable of quantitative measurement. That is called as quantitative classification. For example, age, height, weight, prices, production, income, expenditure. All these can be, all these kind of attributes can be expressed in the form of quantitative. Such kind of classification is called as quantitative classification. And the next type of classification that is called as geographical. Geographical means according to the regions or according to the places. In this type of classification, the data are classified according to the geographical region or the place. That is kind of a geographical classification. For example, if you want to have the study of attributes, that is the kind of production, the production of paddy in different states or the production of wheat in different countries. So this will become the classification, geographical classification. And the next one is called as chronological classification. What is this chronological classification means? The data is being collected or whatever the data collected, they are going to be arranged according to the order of time expressed in the it may be in the form of years, the arrangement, or the arrangement may be in the form of months or in the form of weeks. So that kind of classification is called as chronological classification. So after the basis of classification, let us we can come across some of the terms which is necessary to understand in the case of statistics for the calculation. Let us will go one by one, that is called as variables. Whatever the characteristic features when we are going to be measured or the data or the facts when we are going to be measured in terms of numbers, they are called as variables. The variables are nothing but the the variables are nothing but the characteristic features which varies or which changes or which differs from one person to the another person or from one time to the another time or from one place to the another place. Where the variables or the characteristic features when we are, which is going to be changed or when they are going to be expressed in the form of quantitative phenomena, that is called as the variables. And the next thing is called as frequency. What do you mean by this frequency means? Frequency is nothing but the number of times repeated. How many number of times the variable varies? That is called as frequency. For example, we can able to say that if you are going to have the variable that is called as marks. So if 100 marks means 100 marks, how many students are secured or how many candidates have scored? For example, 90 marks means how many students have secured 90 marks. For example, if it is 10, if it is 15 means the repetition of the numbers, that is called as frequency. The number of times where the variable is repeated or where the variable varies, where we are going to be expressed in the form of frequency. That is called, or it can be denoted as F. Then what do you mean by this frequency distribution? Means this frequency distribution is nothing but a systematic presentation of all the values taken by a variable and corresponding frequency is called as frequency distribution. See, when we are going to see the variables, along with the variables, if the variable, how many time it is going to be occur, if the separate column is going to be shown, that is called as frequency distribution. The variable values where we are going to be presented according corresponding to the frequency values, that is called as frequency distribution. Then what do you mean by this frequency table? You know that table or tabular form of presentation of data is nothing but the data when we are going to be expressed in the form of rows and columns, horizontal and vertical representation of the data, that is called as tabular presentation. The tabular presentation of the frequency distribution. When we are going to express the variables in one column and frequency in another column means that kind of table is called as frequency table. And next one is tally bars. What are these tally bars are nothing but the small vertical bars when we are going to be expressed in the form of parallel to each other, they are called as tally bars. For example, if you want to measure or if you want to count, tally bar 1 means 1 vertical bar, 2 means 2. The same numbers are being repeated, it has to be kept in one particular group. So tally bars are nothing but the vertical bars which are parallel to each other, which is indicating the frequency values or the variations of the variables can be measured with the help of tally bars. And the next term that is called as series. What do you mean by series? Series is nothing but the systematic arrangement of the data, or it can also be called as sequence. The arrangement of data either in a ascending order or on the form of descending order, it is called as a series. Again, the series are classified into three types. One is individual series, discrete series, and continuous series. How the individual data is being arranged. Individual series means which contains of only variable values. It doesn't have frequency. All the when the data we are going to be collected, which is in the form of ungrouped, we are going to keep as it is, right? So the ungrouped form of data without the variations or without frequency columns, they are called as individual series. For example, when we are going to read out the marks, that is 20, 30, 10, 30, 40, 50, and 45, all these variables are called as, all the variables of arrangement of the data, it is because it contains of only variables, so it is called as individual series. The series which contains of only variables, it is called as individual series. Then what do you mean by this discrete series? Means where the series which contains of frequency column, the variables corresponding to that frequency column is going to be presented, or where we are going to be measured the occurrence of the variables values in the form of frequency. That is called, that type of arrangement of the data, it is called as discrete series. And the third one, it is called as continuous series. See, both this individual and discrete series are coming in the group of ungrouped data, and the continuous series we are going to be expressed in the form of one particular limit, the range of data. For example, a set of data 10 to 20, 20 to 30, 30 to 40. So within that group only where the variables are going to be occur, or the frequency if you are going to be measured, along with the class intervals and frequency column, if you are going to be seen, that is called as continuous series. The range of the data arranged according to two limits. One will be the upper limit and the lower limit. That is called as class intervals. Okay. So along with that class interval, for example, the marks 10 to 20. How many students have secured from 10 to 20 marks? Means in the frequency column it is showing 5, means 5 candidates have secured the marks from 10 to 20. That range of data, that arrangement is called as class interval. Now that type of class intervals along with frequency, if you are going to be shown, that is called as continuous series. And the next content is, or the thing, or the is called as class interval. What do you mean by this class interval? Means it is the numerical width of any class in a particular distribution. We are going to be seeing in the case of class intervals the difference between two class limits. One will be the upper limit, another one will be the lower limit. For example, here we can able to see 0 to 10 means 0 is the lower limit and 10 is the upper limit. So in this manner, we are going to have the difference between the two limits, that is called as class intervals. Again, in the case of class intervals, we are going to come across two methods. One is exclusive method, another one is the inclusive method. What is this exclusive method of arrangement of data means? So under this method, the upper limit, here the 10 is the upper limit, 0 is the lower limit. The upper limit of one class will becomes the lower limit of the second class interval. See here, 0 to 10, 0 is the lower limit, 10 is the upper limit. And again here 10 to 20, 10 is the lower limit, 20 is the upper limit. The upper limit of one class will becomes the lower limit of the second class interval. That is called as exclusive method. So here the upper limit will be repeated again. It will become again the lower limit for the second class interval. Or we can able to see this 0 to 10 to 10 to 20. Again this 20 will become, here in the second class interval, if it is upper limit means in the third it will become the lower limit. Such kind of arrangement of the method of class interval is called as exclusive method. And the next kind of method, that is called as inclusive. In case of inclusive method, so here the upper limit of one class will not becomes the lower limit of the next class interval. See here 10 to 19. In the next class interval we are going to see 20 to 29, 30 to 39. Here 19 will not be repeated again. But in the first case we can able to see the upper limit will become the lower limit of the second class interval. But In inclusive class interval, it will be included in the same class interval. It will not become the lower limit of the next class interval. That is called as inclusive method of class intervals. And the next content is called as class frequency. Here, the number of observation in any class frequency or the number of observation corresponding to the specific class is class frequency. And what is this cumulative frequency mean? The total of all the values which is constructed by adding the frequencies of the first class interval to the frequencies of the second class. Then the total is added to the frequency of the third is called as cumulative frequency. Again, in cumulative frequency, there will be a less than cumulative frequency and a more than cumulative frequency. How this less than cumulative frequency is going to be obtained means by adding successively the frequency of all the previous classes, including the class against which is written, and the cumulated is started from the lowest to the highest side. And in the case of more than cumulative frequency, it is obtained by adding successively the frequencies of the class from the end to the beginning of the classification upward, and it forms a descending total of the frequencies from the beginning. And the next content is called as midpoint. What do you mean by this midpoint means is nothing but mid values of the class intervals. So it can also be obtained by the upper limit plus lower limit divided by 2. This is the formula where we are using for the calculation of mid values or the midpoints. And the next one is open-ended classes. What are these open-ended classes mean? In case of classification of data, the lower limit of the first class or the upper limit of the last class, if it is not specified. So the first limit in the case of class interval, in the case of continuous is the first limit and the last limit. If it is not specified in the classification, it is called as open-end classifications. So, and the class boundaries are when the inclusive classes are converted into exclusive classes, the new lower limit and upper limits are going to be formed. They are called as class boundaries. You can able to come across that when the inclusive method is there. If you are going to convert it into exclusive, inclusive means that the upper limit will be included in the same class. It will not exclude to the next class interval. After conversion into exclusive class intervals, we can able to see the new lower limits and the upper limits. So that kind of classification is called as the class boundaries. So with the help of this, I am going to end the session. Thank you.